Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. We're still on the Icelandic stories, the folk tales, and we're still on the saints and sinners part as well. And this one is called My John's Soul. Once upon a time there was an old couple who lived together. The man was rather a wild sort and had a bad reputation, in addition to which he was lazy and useless in his household. His wife was very unhappy about this and often scolded him, saying he was good for nothing but squandering whatever she scraped together, for she herself was never idle. She turned every trick she knew to earn their necessities and always managed to come out on top, whomever she had to deal with. But even though they disagreed on some things, the old woman loved her husband dearly and never let him want for anything. This went on for a long time. One day the old man took to his bed and was very ill. His wife watched over him, and when he took a turn for the worse, it occurred to her that he was probably not too well prepared for his death, and doubtful if he would be allowed to enter paradise. So she thought it might be advisable that she herself try to introduce her husband's soul. She then took a skin bag and held it over the old man's face, and when he gave up the ghost, it went straight into the bag, which the woman immediately tied up with a string. That done, she set off for paradise, keeping the bag under her apron. She soon reached the gates of heaven and knocked. St. Peter answered, asking what her business was. "How do you do?" said the old one. "I've come here with my John's soul. You probably heard of him. I should like you to please take him in." "Ah, yes, well," said Peter. "Unfortunately, I can't do that. I certainly have heard of that John of yours, but never anything good." The old one then replied, "I didn't think, St. Peter, that you of all people would be so heartless. You have obviously forgotten what happened to you in the old days, when you denied your master." Hearing this, Peter went back in and locked the gates, while the old woman sighed wearily outside. After a short time, however, she knocked again, and this time St. Paul answered. The woman greeted him and asked him his name, which he then told her. She then begged him to take care of her John's soul, but he said he didn't want to have anything to do with it, remarking that the John of hers wasn't worth any grace whatsoever. This angered the old woman, and she said, "Look who's talking. I suppose you were more worthy of grace back in Antiquity, where you were persecuting God and all good men. I don't think I'll ask you any more." Paul hastened to lock the gates. When the old woman knocked for the third time, the Virgin Mary came out. "How do you do, my dear?" said the old one. "I hope that you will let my John in, even though Peter and Paul won't allow it." "I'm very sorry, my good woman," said Mary, "but I just don't dare. He was such a beast, that John of yours." "Oh, I don't blame you," said the old one, "but I thought you of all people would recognize human frailty. Or have you forgotten that you had a child whom you couldn't father?" Mary didn't care to hear any more, and locked up as quickly as she could. For the fourth time the old woman knocked at the gates. This time Christ himself came out and asked what she wanted. She answered meekly, "I wanted to ask you, my beloved Redeemer, to let this wretched soul here inside the door." Christ answered, "It's John, isn't it?" "No, woman, he didn't believe in me." And he was speaking, he began to close the gate at the same time. But the old woman, acting swiftly, flung the bag with the soul in beside him, and it was swept far into the palace of heaven before the doors slammed shut. It took a load off the old woman's heart to know that her John's was, after all, safely inside paradise, and she joyfully returned to her home. And that's all we know about the old woman and the soul of her John. The end. What an interesting tale that one is. Very different indeed. The next one is called An Outlaw Killed. It happened in the fall shortly after the Hazard ships, which began in 1783. 3 men, they were of Bikupstunga, rode north to the mountains to round up stray sheep. 2 of them, named John and Nicholas, were farmers. The third one was an adolescent called Bjarne. John was getting on in years and a veteran mountain man who had been quite a stalwart and hardy fellow. The 3 of them advanced far to the north until they went close to the glaciers. But when they caught sight of 4 men riding towards them, John asked his companions to turn back as fast as they could, riding through hilly terrain. They had 2 horses each, all fairly swift, and they made all possible speed. They had been galloping for some time when they noticed that only 1 man was still pursuing them. He was riding a roan horse and carrying a cudgel or birch. John realized that the stranger was determined to have it out with them, and he dismounted. When the outlaw reached them, he jumped off his horse and struck Nicholas with his cudgel across the head, rendering it useless. But John ran at him, and they hadn't wrestled long before John overcame him. For Bjarne had thrown a rope around his feet. Then John had delivered Bjarne to cut the man's Achilles tendons. That's a really bizarre thing in a story, sorry. The outlaw let out an enormous scream and threatened to haunt and kill John if he were to slew him. John made no answer, but drew a knife out of his sleeve and cut the outlaw's throat, working him over in a rather a ghastly way, for the fellow struggled fiercely all the while. What surprised Bjarne most was how effectively John held him down. In the meantime, Bjarne wanted to take the outlaw's horse, which he had left with, and the rein was there too. But Bjarne couldn't catch it, and it ran back with a loud neigh. John placed his outlaw's head by his buttocks, saying he didn't think he would haunt anybody at all. The man was clad in a cloak of skin, with the fur on the inside, and had a large knife on him. John took the knife and told his companions to carry on as they could. Although the hills had delayed the others in their pursuit, they might still catch up. The 3 of them took off post-haste and didn't stop until they were back home. According to Bjarne, he never once saw John flinch at his deed, and the rumour was that John had previously killed other outlaws, daring his mountain searches and the paths in which he dared tread while he were looking for stray sheep. He had killed a many, but he strongly admonished Bjorn not to tell anyone what had happened, and Bjarne told the story quietly to a friend of his, only when he was an old man. Having married and moved to the north to the farm of Fossa in Fossadar, which branches out of Svade That's the end of that story, and I'm sorry, but that was the most bizarre story, because here it says, right, so further up, that Achilles tendon bit caught me off guard, I must be honest. It was very unusually worded, but then later on, we have Bjarni, and it's always Bjarni from the start to the finish, except for in one place where it says Bjorn. I find that very odd. Anyway, the next one is Up my six in the name of Jesus. Once in the fall, 6 men went up to the mountain pastures on a mop-up scratch search for sheep. Their leader was a big, stalwart man. I don't know what that means, I'm sorry. Of great courage. When they had reached the farthest part of the search area, they were caught in a blizzard and lost their way, having no longer any idea where exactly they were. After a long while, they felt they were going downhill and discovered they were in a small valley. Here they came upon a farm and knocked on the door. An old man, very ugly and evil looking, answered. He told them he was not used to people coming, not in these parts, and especially not snooping around his farm. And he gave his visitors a hostile look. The leader answered on everyone's behalf, because he thought, well, he's a leader, he must be the one to answer, after all. And he answered of his men, complaining to the old man that they had come here because they had been lost in the storm and they did not know which way they were going. And without being asked, he then made his way inside, along with his companions, dragging them too. The old man neither permitted nor protested their entrance. When they had been in the house for some while, a young but very sad-looking woman brought them bowls of meat. While the old man watched from the doorway, she whispered to them, under her breath, "Eat what's on the farther side of the bowl." They got the impression that there was mutton on that side, but human flesh was on the other. Later, the girl cleared the table and, helping them off with their wet clothes, told them again under her breath, "Be wary, don't take off your underwear and don't fall asleep." It was a moonlit night. The leader of the mountain men lay down in a bed that was all in the shadow, and he told his companions not to stir, no matter what happened, until he called them. Shortly after they were all in bed, the old man entered the room. He went over to one of the men, felt his chest and said, "Lean chest, lacking vigour." He felt all the men the same way, mumbling something similar to himself each time. The last bed he came to was that of the leader, and when he groped about him, the old man said, "Fleshy chest, full valiant." So saying, he went into a corner of the room, picking up an axe, and returned to the bed. But the leader followed every move he made, and as the old man struck, he rolled out of bed, so that the would-be murderer missed him, hitting only the bedclothes. Then he made a grab for the axe and wrestled it from the old man. Deprived of his weapon, the old one yelled out loud, "Up, my 12, in the name of the devil." Hearing that, the leader brought the axe down on the old man's head, splitting his brain, and said in turn, "Up, my 6, in the name of Jesus." The end. These stories are brutal, aren't they? Like, they really are brutal when you think about it. The murderous tales, that's for sure. That's really interesting, though. Really interesting. There is another story regarding that, and it goes about the same way, but it's said that the moment the man chopped off the leader chopped off the head, a trapdoor opened in the floor, and another head popped up, and then the leader chopped that head off, and subsequently he slew 12 of them in the same way, so they all kept popping up out of the trapdoor, and he would take the heads off as soon as they looked up. And the story does go on to say that they found many valuables in the house and sheep, and well, they ended up with a prosperous life, basically. That's how another story ends anyway. It goes on to say they ended up with a prosperous life, but they actually slew 12 different beings that popped their heads up out of a trap. So yeah, they're really, really brutal and bizarre stories. And the word is not quite right, and I'm not sure if it's like misprints or I don't know. I just find it very bizarre. Thank you for listening. I truly appreciate it. Please hit the like and share if you can. It would really help. Many blessings.